Hello and welcome to episode 29 of Mjolnir the Movies, and we have our new special effects courtesy of, it's some East European or something, isn't it, James?
Yeah.
That's right. A rather spectacular intro by someone who must remain uncredited. But thanks for that anyway, James. And as it happens, we are indeed reviewing Tron and Tron Legacy and the Tron franchise in general. So very apt. There we go. Now, I remember seeing Tron when I was a young boy, actually, when I had measles. And I watched it in the dark because I had measles in my eyes and everything. This was long before the MMR vaccine, so-called. And in the old days, you basically stayed at home, drew the curtains, wore sunglasses, and basically just rode it out. And you were bored shitless for a couple of or 3 weeks, something like that.
Isn't that just being a teenager?
Except I think it was about 8, but anyway, because you can't read, of course, because it's all dark and everything. And I was allowed to watch one film per day through sunglasses, because of course you're not allowed the light from the television and so on. So I was allowed one film, and that was it. And this particular day, the film was Tron, which is available at the video store on VHS. So I watched it. I didn't watch it at the cinema. I watched it when it came out on VHS in the good old days of VHS. Very 80s, and this is a very 80s film.
Very appropriate.
But the good thing is that I sort of had a semi-cinematic experience because I was there in the dark and everything, and I think that this is a film that actually benefits from a cinematic experience because you don't really want to watch the film in the light.
Yeah, if you can get it on a big screen too. Big screen, good sound would make a difference.
Yeah, and as I say, in complete darkness. Because the film, in its scenery, benefits, I think, from having extra darkness around it. So that then you're sort of in the grid yourself.
And the visuals for this are just incredible.
Yeah, and people now, I've seen a lot of reviewers criticizing the visuals, but this was revolutionary way back in the 1980s. As I say, when I first saw this, I thought, whoa, this is amazing. Nothing like this had been seen before.
And the craft and the skills and techniques involved in doing it. When you look into this, any kind of text on it, or if you get any kind of documentary behind the scenes, it's incredible. It's not, it's one simple trick and that was it. No, this was, highly skilled people with great crafts and genius to work out these effects, because you couldn't just fire up a program and render something and composite, which still takes skill now, but in their time before it was, we had these kind of modern tools, it was all the more incredible what was involved. Yeah, multiple exposures, like 45 exposures on a film, things like that. Crazy.
Yeah. The odd thing is that it was actually banned from having a nomination for the best visual effects at the Academy Awards because they felt that all this computerized stuff was cheating.
Robbed.
Yeah, that's right.
And the saddest part is a lot of it isn't computery. A lot of it's just really clever matte paintings and multiple exposures and so on.
Yeah. Although they did give it the award 14 years later. I think
that'll help at the box office.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because it didn't actually do that well at the box office.
No.
Considering, I mean, $17 million was the budget, which was pretty good. That was a sizable budget back then, back in 1982. And at the box office, it gathered $50 million, which is probably about a break even, really.
And its opening, it was only something like 4 million domestic. It was quite poor.
Yeah.
So that 50 million is your sort of slow, long burn takings worldwide. So it's, for them, that's quite disappointing because they're hoping to see that money come back quick.
That's right.
the franchise as a whole became enormously profitable. That's the one thing about it, is because this thing's had computer games, arcade machines, home console games. It's had all sorts of merchandise for it, and sequels and cartoons and so on. So it actually became a franchise worth a lot of money, despite the fact the original film never did great.
And despite the fact that the sequel did even worse.
It deserved it,
Yeah,
quite frankly.
absolutely. And it's very odd actually, because given the fact that Tron was a success in terms of merchandising and so on, it's pretty much set up to succeed. Really, the problem with the Tron Legacy is the script, but we'll get on to that later. The script is absolutely dire, to be quite honest, and the whole internal logic. But we'll come on to that. I'm going to talk about the opening, the very first opening scenes of Tron, because that again is quite revolutionary. Where you have the opening of you have Tron in big capital letters there, and the lettering is hollow, and you sort of go down through it, through into circuitry and everything. You know, you have all these circuit boards and so on, and then you have a mixture of flashing between the grid and the arcade game, who are actually playing these characters on the grid. So you have the world of the users and the world of the programs, and how the programs, are sort of really there battling it out.
And it was unusual at the time to have these entertaining credit sequences. Normally you'd expect the kind of just the standard credits to start crawling up and the slow introduction to it. But this was somebody's, again, it just shows you the dedication to the craft of it. Even something quite mundane becomes very entertaining and immediately pulls you in.
Yeah. I watched Red Letter Media. One of the reasons I picked this to do and to review actually is because I saw Red Letter Media's review of it, and
Right.
they tore it to pieces. Absolutely tore this film
The
to
original.
pieces. Yeah,
Oh,
and and I don't know why. I think that the original is a thoroughly entertaining film. It's very tongue in cheek. I think it's designed sort of for children and teens, basically. Basically, the people who play video games the most.
yeah.
It's only natural. And so to look for any kind of extreme depth in it, although there are some quite interesting ideas and so on. It's a bit like the black hole, although the black hole went too far in its big ideas and so on to market it for kids. But I think that this is aimed quite right, actually.
Yeah. And what's nice about it is one of those films that the parents could take the kids along to, and the parents will come out quite happy too. They'll not be sort of bored out their mind.
Yeah,
And they've done it not in the modern cynical way where they'll have some sort of uncomfortable and I would say inappropriate sex appeal thrown in, or they'll have the innuendo laden jokes that they're supposed to be going over the kids' heads and the parents will have a giggle at. It's not done that way. It's just done by being well crafted and entertaining.
yeah, that's right. And kids will sort of take things more seriously, and the adults will sort of have a bit of a laugh at some of the dialogue. There's one I marked out, which was basically to introduce the master control system, master control program, and Sark, who are the big villains, of course. And the master control program says to Sark, "You're getting brutal, Sark, brutal and needlessly sadistic." And Sark replies, "Thank you, Master Control." And to us as adults, it's quite hilarious. But for kids, it's sort of just sort of, look, these are the bad guys. But I couldn't help but find it humorous. In fact, David Warner, who plays Sark, and Ed Dillinger, of course, because the thing about this whole film is that everyone sort of has a counterpart on the grid as well as in real life. So briefly, Kevin Flynn has Clue. Ed Dillinger has Sark, of course, and so he's a villain in real life. He's a corporate executive who's corrupt, and on the grid he's Sark, who is basically the Master Control Program's servant, and in real life he becomes a servant as well. Because the Master Control Program blackmails him, of course. So, yeah, David Warner. Now, he pretty much reprises his role from Time Bandits. I don't know if you noticed that.
Yeah.
Because he plays evil in Time Bandits. And it's pretty much exactly the same role.
And the way he hunts along the good gang and drives the plot.
Yeah, that's right. But the character as well as is exactly the same. It's so he's just reprising his role there, but it's a very good role. It's a very good trick that he can do. There's a little sort of hint at drug use. I don't know if you got that.
Mm-hmm.
When the Master Control Program puts Sark in his place, and he says that he's going to slow down his power cycles. And I thought that was a bit of a drug reference in there. Because he said, I need that.
I thought it might have been more like their life force. That was the sort of their blood.
Well, I thought it was two things at once. I thought that one, it was this sort of addiction to power, which Ed Dillinger obviously has up in the real world. But equally, I thought addiction there to this substance that gives him energy and everything. And in the real world, is Ed Dillinger coked up to the eyeballs? I don't know. Is he doing wild life? I don't know. It might just be me, my interpretation in it. I don't know. But certainly there are big religious overtones as well.
Mm.
And this whole user cult that they have. Although, in a way, I suppose the users are indeed manipulating them all the time when you think it's what they're there to do, these programs.
And they are aware of it. This is the thing. They're actually aware of their purpose and quite happy about it.
Yeah. Although, the thing is that the MCP is trying to stop this sort of religion. He's a bit of a nihilist in a way, isn't he? He's trying to create a sort of nihilistic society without any religious ideas.
And in his comments to Dillinger, you hear how he's constantly bored. The Master Control Program's becoming bored, more and more bored, looking for challenges, but has nothing. But you realise at that point when he's talking about invading the Soviet and American military programs, that he's got no purpose. He's just expanding and trying to entertain himself.
Yeah, that's right. Of course, the MCP starts off as a chess program, doesn't it? But that's interesting, actually, because what's a chess program meant to do if it's an AI chess program? Well, it's meant to get better at chess, and it's meant to get better at tactics. And so it would actually be quite perfect as in developing as a megalomaniacal kind of authoritarian program or whatever. So there is a decent internal logic, I think, within Tron.
Well, I've always said that's key to any film, whether it's fantasy or science fiction, is the internal logic. Same with written fiction or whatever form it takes. It's the internal consistency that matters. As long as you can make it believable to watch and you stick to it, that's fine. You don't look at a film with wizards and say, oh, that's impossible, because magic in real life is impossible. You're willing to accept that magic can happen within whatever structure is given in the narrative. So I'm fine with what Tron did, because they presented it simplified enough and sort of fantasized enough that it was acceptable. And this is in direct contrast now, looking back to Tron Legacy, which made the huge mistake of trying to make it more, feel the air quotes, people, realistic, which is a disaster, because as soon as you start trying to make it more realistic and down to earth and strip away the fantasy elements and the simplifications that come with that, you come crashing into reality, and people can nitpick it even more, and you find even more flaws because you can never chase reality 100% and write a fantasy at the same time.
That's very right. And Tron Legacy gets. Well, we'll come on to Tron Legacy in a bit, but it does get into some right old nonsense at times. There are some good bits of dialogue in there. Remember the old lab guy, and he says computers and programs will start thinking and people will stop, which has become quite true in a way. Because I wonder how many people can actually do addition in their heads and subtraction and multiplication,
Well,
division and so on.
every measure with these things on average it's going down. There's been a lot of studies even showing that the whole assumptions with the Flynn effect, with this idea of constantly rising IQs is nonsense, and in fact things are going down instead. Attention spans are dropping rapidly. That's been proven time and again. And also, I've also got to wonder with people, certain sort of logical, practical abilities are diminishing too, I think.
Yeah, very much so.
Thinking about the current, because people could be listening to this a year later, so currently, if the world hasn't been destroyed, there's a coronavirus freak out going on, and because you get all the doomsday preppers, every time the market fluctuates or something happens, they're telling you to do this, that, and the other. And what amused me was you get the usual claim about, buy tinned food and don't forget a can opener because otherwise you'll have to bash the tins open. And it's just really petty. It's like a chip on my shoulder. But the number of times I've heard that and you think, why would you bash a tin open? Before tin openers came about, people could open up a tin.
Yeah.
You can rub the lip on on anything at all that just abrades and the lid falls off. You can open it with a knife. You can do any number of things. But it made me wonder if these are meant to be practical people, because they're talking about doing all their prepping and being practical, why is the idea that they strip away whatever the current technology is and they don't just regress to the next level down? They're regressing to cavemen bashing things with rocks.
Yes, that's right.
It's like if they don't have a touchscreen tablet or phone, or it's just rocks, that's it. We're just straight back to rocks. Every apocalyptic film that showed them going tribal, it was optimistic. It turns out they're not even going to be using spears.
Yeah, there's a certain Scandinavian gentleman who was imprisoned for a while, a bit of a rock star who lives in France, and he actually wants to go back to the caveman way of life, it would appear. He keeps going further back. At one time it was the Iron Age, then it was the Bronze Age. I think we're into the Stone Age now.
Well, his wife uses a Dyson Hoover and says she'll never give it up.
Yes. Oh dear. Anyway, the other thing about David Warner is he also plays the MCP as well. Did you notice that?
Masked a bit. He's got such a recognisable voice. Even with the masking, you can tell who it is. He did some great voice acting too.
Yeah, absolutely. But of course, that equally is, of course, it's an extension of Dillinger. Now, the Master Control program says that no one user wrote me. I'm worth 1 million of their man years. It's obviously got Ed Dillinger's impression on it, and got Ed Dillinger's mentality.
And of course, the proof of it being not entirely his was when it was stripped back and you saw it didn't look like him.
Yes.
So that his voice was layered on top of this, and as he said, millions of hours from all the stolen code that kept getting added and added to it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think in the end, doesn't it have the old guy's voice?
It doesn't. He doesn't actually have any voice. It's just a typewriter. Remember, it's just an old fella in a stone sort of throne with a typewriter.
Oh yes, that's right. But isn't it the older guy who's on the board?
I wasn't sure if it was him or not because he had the other character operating the interface. Remember?
Yes, that's right. He did.
So I wasn't sure if it was him, but it didn't. I think it was somebody else.
Yeah, Dumont, that Guardian program. Yeah, and the old guy is Dr. Walter Gibbs. Regarding programs, there's also a little sort of Jewish program. I don't know if you noticed him there, called Crom.
Yep, that's funny enough. That's played by Peter Jurask. Him and the actor that played Tron
Yeah,
Bruce Boxleitner, both appeared in Babylon 5 after this.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, Jurassic. He played Londo. What was it called?
Malari.
That's him. Yes.
Weird how these things happen.
Yeah, that's right. But he sort of plays a stereotypical Jewish. You know, it's an accountancy program, if I remember rightly as well.
That's right.
So,
and everything about the nature and the body language all fits with.
That's right. And I sort of had it into my head. You know, is this a sort of a little Holocaust reference here? You know, is being transported. Oh no, it's another shower. Don't send me to the games. It's another shower. You know. But anyway, it's quite an amusing little cameo there. But Bruce Boxleitner's character is interesting as well. Now, I wanted to come on to one of Red Letter Media's criticisms of the film, which was that there was no one clear hero, because you've got Flynn and you've got Tron.
And Ram.
Yeah, and Ram, although Ram is a sort of secondary heroic character, but he's not the main one. Or rather the main two. I don't see it as a flaw at all.
Well, if you look at a lot of classic Greek stories, you'll see that they could have a whole bunch of heroes in it.
Yeah, that's right.
All in the same story. And this is aped by the Marvel stories, which now, in the most recent productions, can have a dozen of them in one film.
Equally, I find that there are two different kinds of hero as well. To sort of make a comparison, I see Flynn as more the Han Solo type of character, and Tron is the more Luke Skywalker type.
Yeah, that's accurate.
So I don't see any problem at all in that.
No, and even as you said, that Ram character being the lesser one, but still working with him, it all fit nicely.
Yeah. So it's interesting.
Showing different types.
Yeah, it's interesting actually what you said about Greek stories and so on. I mean, going back to the very first epic, which is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is not Greek, of course. It's is it Babylonian, Mesopotamian? Anyway, going back to that, the Epic of Gilgamesh, you have dual heroes because you have Enkidu as well. So that this is not a problem. I don't see this as problematic at all.
It fits in with a long history and tradition of storytelling.
Yeah. The problem is, of course, now this is called Tron, and that's quite okay. But then when you get on to Tron Legacy, Tron's pretty much not in it.
No, that's right. You get a very brief mention, and then gone. You've got Bruce appears, does a good performance on the outside world, the human world, but otherwise that's it. You've just got this growling ninja who's meant to be standing.
Tron Legacy, for me, now that really is a flawed film.
Oh, it's dreadful.
Yeah.
And a pox upon everybody that voted it up on IMDb. Why Tron Legacy has the same score, exactly the same, currently at 6.8, as the original Tron is a total mystery. I can't imagine what was going through their heads or what film they must have watched, because it couldn't have been the same ones I did.
Daft Punk fans.
Oh, I mean, that's about it. But even if you were crazy for them, it's hardly worth watching 2 hours of that tripe for maybe 3 minutes worth of Daft Punk.
Yeah, I'll tell you the big flaws in it. For me, one of the biggest flaws is the time scale just doesn't seem to make sense to me.
It did feel off at times. Oh, and also the rather poorly, there was the special effects I felt were mistakes. Like the intro, the absolutely horrible young version of Jeff Bridges talking to the boy in the room, which looked completely inhuman, with his lips that looked like these slow moving animatronic rubber lips moving. Because they obviously have to have the young version of the actor talk to the young boy and then show him when he's older, sort of thing. But it doesn't work. It made sense to have the CGI version of him as Clue, but it didn't make sense to have the CGI version of him in the real world.
No, that's right.
That was a mistake, and that shows the difference in the craft and the care between the originals, who not only did they have the genius to do what they did and pull off, but they also understood the limitations of their techniques and worked within them. They didn't feel limited by them and produced something poor as a result. They used it to the best it could be and made something really good. Well, in these ones, they just ignored the flaws in it and just did it anyway. Instead of, they could have filmed that scene differently. They could have had a voiceover with a flashback. There's any number of ways you could fill in the backstory to a film. You don't need to show that scene and they'll film it the way they did. But they did it anyway and just thought, oh, we'll get away with it. Even though you'd have to be blind not to see the problems with that. And anybody working as a editor or a director or whoever gave that to say so would have seen the flaws in that really crappy CGI. It's terrible at the CGI in the sequel. I could go on at length. So disappointing. Because for this, I watched one and then watched the other right after to get the best sort of impression of the two together. And it's night and day.
Yeah, what I remember, because I saw this at the cinema, it was in 3D, to be fair, and I think that it works well as a 3D film, or rather, it would have worked had it been done well.
Yeah,
and
the trouble with that, if it's relying on a gimmick like that, it's not much of a film, is it?
That's very true. Although I've got nothing against 3D and so on. It seems to have disappeared again now, though, 3D.
Well, it comes and goes about every 20 years, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Remember a lot of the old slasher horror films, the sort of Jason and so on. They had 3D back in the day that now, when you watch it on DVD, it's really confusing because there's all this stuff keeps coming at the screen and people don't know why when they watch it now. But the idea was it was meant to be you're wearing your 3D glasses in the cinema back then. So, but now when you watch it on DVD, you go, why does all this stuff keep coming at the screen? All these weird scenes of things coming at the screen? Because it doesn't startle you when it's not 3D.
No, that's right. Jaws 3D is one of the ones I remember very well. I think that's where the shark hangs off a helicopter.
Oh.
or I may be getting confused with the Batman film.
I think there was a Jaws one where they had a scene deliberately filmed for the 3D again. I seem that rings a bell.
One of my favourite scenes that in Batman. This is, of course, the old 1960s Batman, where there's the shark, kind of hanging off the helicopter, and there's Batman there hanging there, and says, "Quick, Robin, pass me the shark repellent." Brilliant! What a line! Anyway, yes, I suppose we better get back to Tron Legacy. Yes, Tron Legacy, dear oh dear. The big problem, as I say, about time as well is now, how old is Cora meant to be?
That's a good question. I've no idea.
Because she's got to be at least 20 years old. Because Flynn disappeared in 1990. That means that he saw, because he was creating this world, obviously, with Clue and everything. Then these ISOs appeared. But this is all before he disappeared, because the reason he couldn't get back was because Clue locked him into the mainframe. Locked him on, So this happened at least 20 years before, but yet the character of Cora behaves as though she's newly created. She's like this sort of innocent who doesn't know the first thing about anything.
Yeah, it was this. The line was profoundly naive but unimaginably wise. Well, that's a bit of fucking nonsense anyway, isn't it? Because you can't be profoundly naive and unimaginably wise. It's a contradiction. And someone will say, but no, it's a contradiction. If you're thinking otherwise, it's a contradiction.
Yes, that's right. And you get as well with these ISOs a lot of Holocaustianity.
Oh, yeah.
Propaganda thrown in there.
The dictator with genocide and then enslaving all the others. It's so sad to see the first one, which was so original and exploring this exciting new world of electronics that was becoming domesticated, to suddenly dragging it down to yet another tired old dictator. And you've got a nightclub scene and ninja scene, and here's a scene with a car, and here's a scene with it was all by the numbers. There was all the originality where this was stripped.
Yeah.
It had become a self-parody almost. It was imitating itself, which is the saddest thing. It was like watching something. I've seen better Tron imitators from the things inspired by the original Tron, and they got the aesthetics and the feel of it better than this.
That's right. And this was written. The screenplay was written by Edward Kitsis and Adam Horowitz. Now, they're both Jewish, of course, but the original Tron was also written by a Jewish guy, Steven Lisberger. But you don't get the sort of heavy Hitlerian referencing and so on in that film. But this one, you've got really sort of heavy Judeo-Christian referencing and heavy Hitlerian referencing at the same time, whereby Clue is basically both Satan and Hitler, which is basically what Holocaustianity is all about.
Yeah.
Because you have this idea that Flynn is Yahweh who creates Lucifer, and he falls and becomes Satan and so on. But at the same time, he's this militaristic dictator who wants to take over the real world with his army of standardized programs.
And it was all so cliched, even down to the Clue having the pathetic, cowardly sidekick who's going to betray anybody at the drop of a hat. It's so formulaic. And yet you think of the original. It was original. There was interesting ideas, and the difference was, of course, as we keep saying, it was also aimed at kids, which brings another problem with this one, which was a lot. You could not show this same film to the same age group because there's too many weird things in it.
Yes, I was going to come on to that actually, because I've no idea what audience this was aimed at.
It doesn't feel like it was aimed at us as adults, because there's too many things that stand out as ridiculous if you're looking at it from an adult point of view. But there's too many things that are completely inappropriate for kids, like all the PVC-clad women, including the ones that strip the hero. Whoa, mummy, why are these women eyeing him up and stripping him? Nobody wants to go through that kind of conversation with an 8-year-old or younger. So who was this aimed at? I don't know, but it's absolute nonsense.
Yeah, you watched a bit of the cartoon series, didn't you?
Unfortunately, I didn't get to see enough of it to judge the writing or plot, but what put me off it very quickly was I realised that aesthetically and the feel of it takes all of its cues from Tron Legacy, sadly. Because it follows the same plot with Clue being the dictator, and it's about finding the new Tron who's going to save them all or something. I thought it's really not worth losing sleep over. I could have binged it for this and lost sleep, but I really didn't want to. I watched it to see some of the aesthetics for it, but I found even the animation of it quite unpleasant. The design of the characters is strange, bizarre, long-limbed kind of creatures. While in the original they were just human-looking. The style of it, as I said, follows Tron Legacy. It probably follows its plot cues and writing styles. So I really didn't fancy it at all. Plus, with some of the scenes, there was also, again, slightly odd, like if somebody's storyboarding this sort of poses, and you think, wait a minute, why is that woman, have her butt right in the camera in a skin-tight outfit? It's a bit inappropriate. This is a Disney cartoon it was produced by, so it being a cartoon, you think, surely, in this case, it must be aiming definitely at the lower age bracket compared to Tron Legacy. So why is it showing what I would consider inappropriate scenes with the outfits? I'm not just being prudish. It doesn't bother me in an adult film. I'm talking about for an 8-year-old child or something.
Yeah, that's.
Right. I'm not gonna shock about somebody in a tight outfit. That's fine in an adult film. I'll enjoy it for what it is. But for a small kids, we're talking about a Disney cartoon. It's a different story. That's a bit weird. Who thinks, we'll put that in a kids cartoon? It doesn't look like something I'd recommend. It was cancelled anyway after a short time, this series, so it doesn't seem to have been particularly successful. Whether or not that was down to objections over the tone of it, or they'd misaimed it, or just the fact that they tried to build upon Tron Legacy, which was a big turd anyway. You're trying to spin off something from something dreadful instead of going back to the original Tron maybe and then building upon that, even if they have to revamp it somehow for a modern audience.
Yep, they just didn't have a clue, did they?
Oh,
Oh dear.
oh! I tell you something else about Tron Legacy. It was the intro, to go back to that, with Sam when they show him as an adult early on as it transitions to that. You had the whole "he's a rebel on a bike" scene. How many times have we seen that in a film? This whole, oh, here he is getting in trouble with the police. He's such a rebel. Yawn, people, yawn. We've seen it before. Rollerball remake did that, and it was shit in that. Do you remember?
Yeah, I was just about to say that, yeah.
That's what it reminded me of. The downhill sledding and rollerball. And it was so cheesy in that. And I thought, I can't believe an even bigger budget film, bigger characters, bigger franchise. And that was it. That's the originality they could tap into, was something that was hackneyed even in a B movie like the rollerball remake.
That's right. It's absolute cliched garbage all the way through.
Well,
And
it'll
you,
think
you've
about the
got
original. Flynn was
yeah,
a rebel because he'd lost his business. He was making do with life, but he still was a businessman, albeit of lesser means. So
Yeah.
his attitudes were all explained in a sensible manner. And even then, the adults still criticised him because, oh, you're just, you need to grow up, stop hanging about with teenagers, sort of thing. And he explained himself, and he would, you felt like it was all realistic characters with motivations you could explain.
Yeah, well, there's a huge character change in Flynn actually in this film. His character completely changes.
Yeah,
He becomes like the dude in the Big Lebowski.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Somebody watched Big Lebowski and just thought, oh, let's drop him in as Flynn. It's dreadful. And even like the wee sort of quips he makes about, oh, don't crush my peace, man, and all this kind of thing. It's exactly like him.
Yeah, that's right. And talking about, oh, you're messing with my zen, and so on. And I thought that, well, this is the wrong Jeff Bridges film. It doesn't work. It doesn't work at all.
No, it's very clumsy.
Yeah. And the other thing that doesn't work is why would Clue become evil if he's basically Flynn?
Because he told him to make a perfect world, and that means eugenics and dictatorship. As soon as you strive for perfection or improvement in the world, it must mean you've got to just start killing people at random, because apparently that's it. You either are all sodomizing each other and trying to drive everything into the ground, or it's Hitler.
Yeah. There's a Nazi inside every Gentile.
That's it. You couldn't possibly just say everyone should try to be the best they can and make the world and themselves better. No. You can't have a natural, sensible thing like that. The same thing evolution does in biology. No, you can't do that. But you've got to have a dictatorship or bust. And that's the trouble with the writing. It's like it was written by a teenager that had barely done any reading himself.
Yeah, very true. And it just doesn't make sense at all, the plot. The other thing that's very big in it is propaganda for transhumanism.
And a lot of Eastern philosophy jammed in this time as well.
Biodigital jazz, man. As it's called. Dear, oh dear.
Did you notice the black hole reference or drop in it?
No, I didn't actually.
Very early on, in the boys' room, you see a black hole poster, the Disney's film.
Ah, right. So again, we've got that these ideas of hubris and that this will lead to destruction and so on. But it's done in such an awful and clumsy way.
And also, we can go through some of the bizarre changes as well. Like in the original, the nature of the programs was completely different as they are in Tron Legacy, where now they're basically just people. They're people, and they have nightclubs, and they take drinks, and they have sexual desires, which makes no sense for what they are, because they're just programs. And
Yeah,
these are not, we're not talking about the isomorphs here, the isos, because we see that she's the only one. And we see in the nightclub full of the ordinary programs, they're still acting like that. It's total nonsense.
yeah,
They were shown in the first one to have a very different nature.
that's right. There are no sexual overtones in the first one, actually, because of course it is a kids' film.
Hmm. And it
Where
also works. And they've written it in a way that explains it and makes it sensible. You know, so nobody can say, "Oh, why is everybody acting like eunuchs or something?" But you can say, "No, because they're programs. They're written that way. It's a different world. They don't sexually reproduce. They're written, so of
yeah,
course they're not going to have sexual desires." Well,
and one of the things that doesn't make sense to me as well is the ending, because the ending to the first Tron is very easy. Because Flynn, of course, he gets digitized and disassembled to be put into the grid, and of course he gets reassembled at the end. Now they didn't show that. They didn't show that in Tron Legacy. Why? Because you've got a problem there with that Cora.
yeah, because
'Cause
her biology is non-existent.
that's right.
And that was also why the invasion was nonsense, because all these people are shown constantly in their own bodies and the world around them operating in a physics model that doesn't exist here. So if Clue did invade here, for all the genius he's meant to be, he would invade and instantly everyone would probably vaporise or would collapse, because nothing that they have works in this world. You can't have glowy hovercrafts in this world. It doesn't work.
No, that's right. you
And they
can
show people
you
that have...
can't change the laws of physics, Jim.
That's it. Oh, how long's he been waiting to get that one in? Oh no. And that's the trouble. You see, even the characters with like half metallic faces and bits off them and big metallic holes in them. Well, what would happen if you materialised that in this world? It just wouldn't work.
Yeah. So
And that is why trying to make the film more realistic and more grown up fails, because it's a fantasy at its heart. So if you try and make added false realism into it, in this detail to make the characters more gritty and real, it fails, because then you start saying, well, wait a minute, that wouldn't work, because you're now drawn into the real world's logic system instead of a fantasy one where you'd suspend your disbelief.
That's right, and there is a sort of an element of believability about being disassembled and put onto the grid, because in the first one there's this idea that basically his consciousness has been put in there in a sort of digital form.
Mm-mm.
But of course, you know, his atoms are reassembled at the end, but he's got to have atoms. Whereas this Cora doesn't.
There's a real laser lab they filmed that in.
Oh, is it? Oh, I
Yeah,
didn't know
it's
that.
a fusion research lab. 38 trillion watts they can pump out.
Yeah, and of course it's the same laser that disassembles the young Sam Flynn in Tron Legacy, and we assume that he's therefore reassembled by that same laser. But what about Cora?
Yeah.
How does she get there? Well, she just appears outside, but how? You know, and I'm always asking this question: how?
And there's a lot of it as well. You can start.
Just one little thing, because what Kevin Flynn says about the ISOs, and he talks about a digital frontier to reshape the human condition. Again, how?
Yeah. How is she going to reshape the world when she's shown to be apparently incredibly naive? And that's where you get a creepy tone to it. The other word we could use to describe her is childlike. She might be in a 20-year-old body, but she's childlike. So this guy has a sexual desire for this incredibly ill-informed, childlike woman, and he's dragged her into this real world where now she's completely beholden to him, essentially his slave. Because if their relationship doesn't work, what's she going to do in a world where she does no birth certificate, no social security? She doesn't exist. She's not a legal citizen anywhere.
Well, she doesn't exist because, I mean, she couldn't exist in the real
No.
world, and this is my point.
Yeah, but even if somehow they could make her exist, she's essentially a slave to this Sam. You know, this childlike mind that's tied to him. It's quite a creepy setup.
You see, they could have avoided this. They could have avoided this problem with internal logic, and that's what they did with the 13th Floor. I don't know if you've watched that film. It's a
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
yeah, it's a
That'd be quite an
very
interesting one to do.
yeah. It has certain similarities actually. I think that they pillaged quite a bit from the 13th floor for Tron Legacy, but the 13th floor has a better internal logic to it because what happens is that the computer programs they basically upload themselves into the consciousness of a human being.
Mm.
So basically they replace the consciousness with the programs.
And that's bringing it into a sort of believability then.
Yeah, that's right. But of course that also means that they don't look like what they looked like in the system.
Mm.
But it has a far better internal logic to it than this film that basically avoids how Olivia Wilde, I should say, or Cora or whatever she's called, how
Mm.
she gets into the real world. They completely avoid that, and they
Yeah.
avoid it because it's nonsense.
Well, same with the army. I mean, how would that giant spaceship manifest in that guy's basement anyway? You know, these giant ships and tanks were going to beam in through that laser. The first vehicle you try to fit in that room underground is just going to explode and crush itself.
Yeah, it's not been thought out at all,
And that shows you the lack of craft and care. I mean, as a writer, you've got total control over that world. So all these things are problems, and there are problems that they could have easily sorted out long before the first shot was done. And there's also problems even outside the film, like the visuals were so messy. That was the thing that's quite startling about going back to the original Tron. After seeing all the things inspired by it and the imitators, is how Spartan a lot of it is. But it's a stylistic choice. You get these bold, flat surfaces that are not all glossy and glowing when they don't have to be, but the glowing bits stand out from it. It's very minimalist, the design, and it stands out because of that. This one, everything's messy. There's so much detail and mess in the background, it's hard to even see what's going on. And the sound effects and the music in the original, when you see it was made, it was all these clever ideas like digitizing, not sort of organic sounds. The frisbee throwing, the light disc throwing, was a digitized monkey screech apparently.
Really?
Yeah, and that's why a lot of the sounds have these unsettling and strange effects because they've taken animal purrs and sounds, digitized them to sound unearthly, and then placed them where he would need to be. So they've got that strange sort of sound, but it'll still trigger something in your brain that recognizes these natural sounds of animal purrs, screeches, growls, and so on. And they've used them in that world. Very clever.
Yeah, very clever indeed.
That was all gone in the new one.
And people talk about the Daft Punk soundtrack and everything of this film that it's so wonderful and everything.
Crap.
I didn't. I thought it was very ordinary actually. Certainly not the best thing that Daft Punk have ever done.
It was generic. You could have totally forgotten altogether the music in this. There was nothing special about it at all, including the big nightclub set piece, which was also a bit rubbish. The nightclub set piece and those moments, I'd put on a par with the Matrix sequels, which were also rubbish.
I mean, in the nightclub you have Charlie Sheen. Martin Sheen, sorry, not Charlie Sheen. You have Martin Sheen, who plays probably the most nauseating character I've ever seen in a film. Really spoilt it for me and took me completely out of the film. It's just so over the top and campy, and it doesn't have any sort of seriousness to it.
It didn't fit.
And this is meant to be a serious film.
Yeah.
And so the first film is more campy, but in a general way, like sort of Flash Gordon or something like that.
Yeah, and in the kind of way that kids' films will always feel to an adult.
That's right, yeah. So there's a lot of tongue-in-cheek villainy and so on. But in this, it's deadly serious, and so for Martin Sheen to come up with this character is bizarre.
I think a lot of the problems in this film could have been solved by cutting it down to 90 minutes, like the original Tron. There was no reason for this to be over 2 hours long. There was excess action scenes. Oh, look, yet another scene where they're on the run again. Oh, that's so original. Never seen that in a film. And you had a fight in the nightclub. Didn't even need to fight in the nightclub. They could have cut out a whole bunch of characters, a whole bunch of scenes, or if they did have to have them, pare them down to much shorter ones, like the original, where they just showed enough to give you the feeling and the action and the threat and move the plot on. Here, it was just indulgence, which drags the plot down. There was all
Yeah,
the very boring scenes with Jeff Bridges in his home where he waffled on and it's like, yeah, it's very deep. We get the idea, carry on. you know, it didn't impress me at all. And in some ways, the more they added to these scenes, it also brought in more problems, like the dining scene where he's in this world, the grid, and he's got a roast pig on the table. Well, where's the pigs coming from?
that's right. Indeed, where's the food coming from at all? That's
Yeah.
another problem of the internal logic.
In the
And
original, they
there's
just drank power, and that makes sense because you think it's like you could take it as like electricity, but you could also take it as in like how many CPU cycles, how much of the power of the computing system is being dedicated to one program or another, and that's a concept that exists in computer programs in the real world. So you think, that's quite a clever metaphor. And this one, no, they've got roast pigs with apples in its mouth. Well, that's just nonsense.
Yeah, well, there's a big difference in the first film, and it's the idea that Kevin Flynn is there in a digital form because he drinks from the power source,
Hmm.
like the other programs and
Yeah,
everything, and he can sap the energy from other programs and so on. But in this is flesh and blood.
which doesn't make any sense at all.
It has not been thought through at all, and that is a big problem with it. Have you anything to add before we sign off?
Only that anybody wanting to look at these, it's the first film, it's the only film worth looking at. And other than that, I would suggest to you, if you want more Tron, look at the other franchises like video games or something which has been served quite well elsewhere. But the first film is really the only one I'd really recommend seeing.
Yeah, very much so. Although the first film, I think, is worth seeing.
Yeah, oh, I should say it's the only one worth seeing.
Yeah. So that's it then. End of line.